Welcome, everybody. I think we're still waiting for a couple of people to get into the call, so please give us a couple minutes before we get started. But we're happy that you're here, and we'll see you in a second. All right. I think the last people are still slowly coming in, but it's time to get started. The double materiality assessment from theory to practice. Welcome, everyone. I hope everybody still has some energy left right as we're closing in on lunch, but we appreciate you being here. Today, Jasper Akkermans, a sustainability researcher at Coolset, and myself, Matthijs van der Mars, are going to take you on a deep dive through the double materiality assessment. Now, we're going to turn every stone in an attempt to make this legislation as understandable as possible for you guys. And Jasper has gone to great lengths in order to become an expert on this topic, and I'm going to try my best to keep up with him today. The goal for today is not only to go through the legislation and translate everything into understandable and bite-sized chunks, but also to provide you with some concrete and real-life examples. This in order to see how the DMA and CSRD wide is going to affect companies in practice, and of course also the people working on it. We actually really appreciate any questions you might have, so please add them in the chat, and at the end in the Q&A session, we'll try to answer most, if not all of them. And of course, if anything goes too fast or if anything is complicated the first time around, what we'll do is at the end of this session, hopefully today still, I will get back to you and share the recording of today and the lecture slides so you can have another look. So then we move on to the plan for today. So first, to get our terminology and definitions right, Jasper is going to take you through what is double materiality, followed by what is the double materiality assessment, important distinction there. We go through the stakeholder engagement, the media analysis, the ESRS topics, entity-specific disclosures included, the impact and financial materiality, thresholding, a case study, and then we finish up with some solutions to set you up for success. And as I mentioned earlier, we finish up with the Q&A session. So without further ado, I give the stage to Jasper.
Thank you, Matthijs. I'm just putting us on the screen, as I believe we weren't visible before. Should be working now. Yeah, so just a quick run through of what is double materiality. I think most of us joining today have a basic understanding of the concept, but just to take you through it again, double materiality, as the word already says, has a dual meaning. So first, it allows companies to map the relationship with environment and stakeholders, and it starts with looking out, which is impact materiality. So this is, for example, pollution, human rights, and gender equality. So how does a company affect these things? And then you have the dimension of looking in, which is financial materiality. And here we look at regulatory changes, droughts, and public perception, for example. And these are all applicable within the sphere of ESG, environmental, social, and governance, but more about that in a second. So how do you go from double materiality to a double materiality assessment, and what does it actually mean? So a double materiality assessment falls under the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. I believe most of us attending today do have a somewhat of an understanding, but just to give you a small recap, the CSRD is the newest legislation released by the European Union and will mandate over 50,000 companies next year to report on sustainability metrics, including climate change metrics alongside social and governance metrics. So the double materiality assessment is the first step of annual sustainability reporting. It's a selection methodology for the 10 ESRS topics, of which there are 5 environmental, 4 social, and 1 governance. I'll dive into those in a second. And also just wanted to quickly share with you this quote from the EFRAG. The EFRAG is the organization responsible for drafting up all the double materiality policies, as well as the ESRS policies. So what they say goes. And basically what they've said as well about this double materiality is that the ESRS do not mandate a specific process or sequence of steps to follow in performing the materiality assessment. And so this is left to the judgment of the undertaking. I just wanted to share this with you because this is really something that they've made very explicit, that this is up to the companies themselves as to how they fill in certain elements of the double materiality assessment. I think that's also why some of us are here today, because there is there's question marks, and here at Coolset we're here to answer those questions for you and make sure that you understand everything. Yeah, let's get into it. So basically, the double materiality assessment revolves around 3 things, three key elements. Those are impacts, risks, and opportunities, also called IROs. And basically, within the double materiality assessment, it all comes back to these 3. So don't worry, I'll go take you through this, make sure that you understand. So first, a quick overview of the ESRS topics. As I mentioned, there are 10 of them. They're also called Sustainability Matters. And within these topics, there's always a subtopic, and some of them also have subtopics. So overall, there is 10 topics, 37 subtopics, and 72 subtopics. An example being ESRS S1, for example, which is on workforce. It has a subtopic called working conditions, and this in turn has 8 subtopics such as working time and work-life balance. The IROs have to be broken down into individual levels. With individual levels, I mean that you have to consider the topic, but also the subtopics, for example, and that you have to decide which ones are relevant for your company. To decide what is relevant, you look at different elements, but more about that in a second. Good to know is that ESRS E1 is almost always material. Why almost? Because it is not a company can mention that this is not something to focus on for the reporting year. But if you decide that climate change is not a material ESRS topic, then you need to explicitly mention why that is the case. And why what's interesting is that for other topics, you do not need to explicitly mention why something is not considered material for that reporting year. You just need to mention what your thresholds were for that year and how they were applied. So I'll also explain in this webinar how to apply thresholds. Just a quick run through on ESRS 2, which is general disclosures. Wanted to quickly share this with you because regardless of the double materiality assessment, all companies must report on ESRS 2 general disclosures. ESRS 2 mandates that businesses disclose information on sustainability topics and reporting areas, and includes mandatory reporting on governance, strategy, and IRO processes. An example being IRO 1, which requires a description of the processes to identify and assess material impacts, risks, and opportunities. So when conducting the double materiality assessment, there will be it will be quite practical, and some information might seem like it's missing, but this will all be contained within the ESRS 2 because it really requires a deep dive into these governance, strategy, and IRO processes. Then to start with stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder engagement forms an essential element of the research phase of the double materiality assessment. And I wrote that it is de facto mandatory. Why de facto? Because EFRAG doesn't explicitly mandate it, but they do put a lot of emphasis on it. And at the end of the day, the auditor who goes through your double materiality assessment, once it's done, will require that you've done your due diligence. And a key element of this is to consider the stakeholders involved in your operations, but also in your supply chain. There's two types of stakeholders. You have the internal stakeholders and the external stakeholders. And I just want to leave you with some examples of for what ESRS topics you could consider what stakeholders. So for internal stakeholders, you might interview people for the ESRS S1, which is own workforce, or ESRS S2, works in the value chain. And here you might consider something like surveys for employees, which is more quantitative. And then you have external stakeholders, for which you might consider ESRS E2 pollution, ESRS S4 affected communities, and ESRS S4 consumers and end users. This list is, of course, not exhaustive. It's just an example to get you started and help you understand. There's two main stakeholder methodologies for assessing their opinions on matters. There's the quantitative and the qualitative. Quantitative is usually preferred because it's a bit more applicable, more widely applicable, but interviews do give you the in-depth insights into what some opinions might be and allow you to ask further questions. So there's no one approach. Some companies use explicitly surveys, some use explicitly interviews, some have a mixed approach. It is really up to you as a company to determine which works best for you. Then over to the media analysis. So this also forms a key element in the research phase of your double materiality assessment to scope what is important for your company, what is not important, what do you need to focus on within these 10 topics. So there's various media analysis helps by going through various media sources and helping in establishing the different IROs. Examples include media reports, analysis of peers, existing sector-specific benchmarks, other publications on general sustainability trends, and scientific articles. On the right, you see some examples of what could be useful for your company. It gives your company the necessary depth in some cases to explore the elements that you might not know from simply interviewing stakeholders. Also good to know is that you can elaborate on the silent stakeholder, which is nature. Why silent? Because nature cannot speak for itself. So you either need to include nature-based NGOs in your interviews, or you can also use media analysis to consider how does your company affect nature, and vice versa, how does nature affect your company, which is essentially also a key element of the double materiality assessment. Just wanted to quickly go over entity-specific disclosures with you as well, as this is also a big topic within the double materiality assessment. Basically, you have these 10 ESRS topics, these sustainability matters, and they include a wide range of topics under ESG. But there are cases where your company might have material issues which are not covered under these ESRS topics, and then you need to report on them separately. So what does it include? Its disclosures include, where applicable, all material information related to the reporting areas of governance, strategy, impact, risk, and opportunity management, as well as metrics and targets. So this basically means that you would need to report on all elements of this entity-specific disclosure, just as you would report on when you do the 10 ESRS topics. GRI and ISSB, which are two reporting frameworks, offer standards and comparability. So if you already work with them, you can also refer to those. But there's, of course, more possibilities. And they'll be gradually replaced by sector-specific disclosure standards, which are scheduled to come in 2026. Then we move over to impact materiality, which always precedes the financial materiality assessment, because the former builds, or the latter builds on the former. As the word already says, it revolves around impact, which is broken down into 4 categories. You have actual negative impacts, you have positive, you have actual positive impacts, you have actual negative impacts, then you have potential positive impacts, and you have potential negative impacts. We can see this here in the top right. We see these 4 categories, and then you also have 4 characteristics, which are scale, scope, irremediability, and likelihood. And across these 4 categories, these characteristics are applied. But some good things to remember is that, for example, for negative impacts, we see that irremediability is a characteristic, and for potential impacts, we see that likelihood is one of the characteristics. If you want to explore further what we mean by what these things mean, we have produced a double materiality assessment guide, which we'll share with you at the end of the webinar, that you can download as well. And there we'll also share all the definitions and more details on these terms specifically. So the impact materiality assessment is conducted on topic, subtopic, and sub-subtopic level. And as I previously mentioned, it allows you to, you can decide as a company which ones are material for you. So which ones do you consider in your double materiality assessment, as you don't need to consider all if some are not relevant for your company. Then there's the in-depth, the element that an in-depth impact assessment is not necessary for every ESRS. So for example, if your company produces toxic waste, then ESRS E2 pollution will clearly be material. Over to financial materiality, which builds on the findings of the impact materiality assessment. An example here being that if the impact materiality assessment reveals that employees have bad work-life balance, which is a subtopic of ESRS S1, then a future financial risk might be employee shortages. So this materiality assesses both risks and opportunities, which are the R and the O of the IRO that we keep seeing in the official documentation. And it considers 2 factors, magnitude and likelihood over 3 timeframes, short term, medium term, and long term. So what this means is that as a company, when you consider these risks and opportunities, you look at magnitude and likelihood over these 3 timeframes. Then moving on to thresholding. So first of all, the materiality threshold is up to a company's discretion. What's important to note here is that when the auditor goes through your double materiality assessment, the auditor needs to understand the process behind it. So why were certain thresholds chosen, and why were some material while others were not? It is up to you to determine this, and if you can argue why you've done it a certain way, the auditor will surely give us or her stamp. But it's important to note that it's not just a free-for-all that you can decide yourself. You do need to have a certain accountability to auditors, but also stakeholders. A quote here from EFRAG: an undertaking shall apply the relevant criteria using appropriate quantitative and or qualitative thresholds to assess the materiality of impact connected to its activities. However, ESRS 1 does not prescribe how to set thresholds. So this is really up to the company, and this is also where we at Coolset have drafted up a methodology that I'll share with you now. So best practice is a 5-point Likert scale for the characteristics from both impact and financial materiality assessments. And I just want to quickly go over this matrix with you that we've developed. Sorry. So what we see here is a Y and X-axis. On the X-axis, we see magnitude, and on the Y-axis, we see likelihood. So this is for financial materiality. And then we see this, the scale here goes from insignificant to significant for magnitude, and from very low to very high for for likelihood. And this is basically measured on a 5-point scale. And then if you see that one of the IROs lands on something in yellow, orange, or red, we would recommend to include this in your double materiality assessment from a financial perspective. Also good to note is that if something is only material from an impact or financial perspective, a company can decide to only report on the relevant IROs and subtopics. So what this basically means is that you do not always need to report on everything. If you determine that a certain, if financial materiality is material for a certain topic, that does not by definition mean that you also need to report on impact materiality. What you see on the top right is a matrix that basically shows impact materiality on the right, financial materiality on the top, and on the top right you see both. So depending on where they land, you might need to report on only one, and if they land on the top right, you report on both of them. So just a quick case study to go over what I've just discussed in terms of thresholding. So let's consider Acme International, which is a clothing retailer buying in China and dyeing their clothes in Germany. The media analysis reveals that Germany is at risk of water shortages, and expert interviews reveal that the factor increased this problem. Employee surveys reveal that women experience sexism on the work floor. So we have, for this example, established two ESRS topics for impact materiality and for financial materiality. We look at ESRS E3, which is water and marine resources, and for the fact that there's sexism on the work floor, we consider ESRS S1, which is equal treatment and opportunities for all. For this example that I'm going to show now, we only consider ESRS E3 in terms of thresholding, just to give you a better understanding of how to approach this subject. So we start with impact thresholding. We see here the ESRS E3, and we take the subtopic water, and we consider two impacts. The first one is water pollution from runoff water, and the second one is excessive water use. So we have the first one, we have the classification, which is negative and actual, so it's happening right now. And then we scale, we scope everything on a 5-point Likert scale, these 4 characteristics that are previously discussed. So for the first, we see scale is 3, scope is 4, irremediability is 3, and this is based on internal and external findings. And for likelihood, we leave it empty because this is only applicable to potential impacts. So when we average this, we get to a score of 3.3. And in this case, we put a threshold of 3 and above is material. So we've determined that this is a material topic to report on for this year. And then we see that excessive water use is a negative, but a potential issue with a scale of 4, a scope of 2, and irremediability of 2, and a likelihood of 3. And this gives us an average of 2.75, which means that it is not impact material for this reporting year. Then we move over to financial thresholding, where we have 3 expected financial effects. So one is temporary water shortages, the other is higher water prices due to scarcity, and the third one is subsidies for efficient water systems. The first one is a risk on the medium term. So we look at magnitude. So what's the effect of this financial effect? It's quite heavy, quite detrimental, and the likelihood is quite low though, because it's not set to happen that quickly in Germany as revealed by the media analysis. So it has a materiality score of 2.5 and is not material for this year. Then you have higher water prices due to scarcity. This is a risk in the long term. It's quite a high magnitude of 4, likelihood of 2, and a materiality score of 3. And then we see that subsidies is an opportunity in the medium term. So we have a magnitude of 3, likelihood of 4, and a materiality score of 3.5, which is also material. So based on these things, you can kind of verify for your company, okay, what do we report on this year? What do we omit? And it's also good to note that every year when you do the double materiality assessment again, you do consider these things again, because things change. And that is an important thing to consider as well. So once you've gone through all of that and you've established which topics are material for your company, you have to report. There's 2 things which are really important, in the reporting phase. One is process. So what stakeholders were considered, what thresholds and why, for example. And you also have the outcome, which where you have to report on what sustainability matters are material. And also report on how was this chosen, but for example, which ones weren't chosen with a simple explanation on why they weren't chosen, except for if it's a E1 climate change, then you need to elaborate a lot on why this wasn't chosen for this reporting year. One final quote from the IFRAG: the ESRS do not prescribe specific documentation, but it is reasonable to expect a certain level of documentation to be needed for internal purposes and help insurance providers to perform their work. So here we see 2 key motivators to write the report concisely. which is the internal purposes, which means that for the following years, you have a methodology to build on, but it also helps assurance providers, i.e. auditors, to perform their work to make sure that they can follow your reasoning. Conclusion of all of this. So when conducting a double materiality assessment, first steps are to scope the situation, to understand the context. This means engaging stakeholders, conducting a media analysis, and then moving over to the impact materiality assessment, which considers these 4 characteristics: the financial materiality assessment, magnitude and likelihood. Then you threshold the IROs, which means adding quantitative/qualitative metrics. And of course, then you finalize it with reporting on process and outcome. And then leave it over to my colleague.
Perfect. Thanks, Jasper. So before I head into solutions, I've noticed that during later in the call, a couple of people joined still, and I saw a question in the chat. So I want to iterate again that the slides and the recording of the day will be shared later after this call. So in case you missed the beginning or if anything went by too fast, we'll make sure to get back to you on that. So setting you up for success, I want to go through some solutions that companies can use to tackle the CSRD problem, the double materiality that we discussed today. This is obviously quite a big task, even though Jasper did a great job of making it sound very understandable and doable. But still, I think it's a big worry for a lot of companies and individuals working on it. So starting with the first solution, building an internal sustainability team. So some of you in attendance today might have already have a sustainability team in place or are aspiring to build one in order to tackle this problem. This is obviously a very valuable way to concretely also become more sustainable as a company and get this big reporting task out of the way. Now, there's 2 ways in which you can go about this. Let's first go over an Excel-based solution. And this is a way in which your sustainability experts will use Excel to really build your own solution. However, this requires a lot of manual and complex work, right? You have to distill the entire legislation by yourself and subsequently build all the necessary models in order to become compliant and report on an end-to-end CSRD basis. And this really doesn't utilize your team's expertise in the most efficient way, right? If they're spending all their hours in an Excel sheet, they're not really creating any concrete impact and making your company more sustainable and compliant with reporting. And also, this is prone to unwanted errors or inconsistencies, which are also not great. And this is due to, for example, the presence of knowledge or data gaps. With a software solution, the entire legislation is already distilled for you. You can really work efficiently with multiple departments that need to be involved in CSRD, as it's not only the sustainability team, but it's a company-wide legislation, and you need inputs from everywhere. You can really work efficiently towards in-depth insights from a lot of data points, and you mitigate compliance risk, but I will elaborate on this later. So for the second solution, you can hire external consultants. This is often like an Excel-based solution, as I elaborated on earlier, still quite a long process, which requires a lot of hours from within the organization still. All the knowledge that stays out of the organization, so you don't really build towards the future, as a lot of companies want to build towards a greener and more knowledgeable solution or organization as it stands in the context of sustainability. Good thing with this solution is that you buy off your how do you say this, compliance risk. That's obviously a big help for a lot of companies. But towards the end, you receive a report that doesn't really have any interactive capability. For the third solution, this is relatively similar, where you hire external freelancers. You can again work both with an Excel-based solution or a software-based solution. If it's an Excel-based solution, you're really not making efficient use of the hours of your freelancer, and every hour is expensive. And all the gained knowledge within that freelancer will leave the company once the assignment is over, and he moves on to the next assignment. For the last solution, building internal know-how with a software partner, what you really create here is a place where sustainability experts or not, so people with or without experience in the topic can use this software in order to work towards not only a compliant report, but on the way extend their own knowledge, not only on the legislation, but on sustainability wide. You gain knowledge about both of these topics, so both the sustainability side, creating impact and creating reductions, which you can then report on in your CSRD report. What is nice with this is that you can engage your internal and external stakeholders in the process, and yeah, become a more sustainable company on the way. And of course, the compliance risk here is also taken away. Now, I want to shortly take you through how Coolset does this for companies. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, so we can move on towards the Q&A session. So feel free to get in touch with me, and we can go into depth with this with you and your team. But what we've done is we've created an end-to-end CSRD compliance platform where we take companies through the double materiality assessment, through the general disclosures, and through all the ESRS topics, environment, social, and governance. Of course, within a double materiality assessment, we start with stakeholder engagement. So our sustainability researchers have developed all the relevant questionnaires that can be used in this process. And what we use these questionnaires for is all the scoring necessary. That's, I think, on the next slide. And we get all the scoring necessary to start determining how and which topics are material and what are not. Based on these scorings, we have the double materiality matrices, and that we can use them to score and see which topics are financially material, impact material, or both, of course. But Jasper elaborated on this a lot earlier, so I think that's clear. But I wanted to show you how we do that at Coolset for companies in this process. So, from the double materiality assessment, you're taken through every step in the process, and you get guidance along the way, right? So as you'll see, is that with every question you answer, you get guidance and you get sourcing from the ESRS. Let's see. Yeah, so every question that you're on, you'll be highlighted where in the ESRS you need to find relevant information, and the Coolset assistant guides you on the way. So based on the answers that you provide in the double materiality assessment, all the ESRS topics that are material will be unlocked, and you will again be guided here fully through the process. All the ESRS topics that are not material will stay locked, which will avoid any unnecessary work or unnecessary headaches. And this is how you move basically from the beginning to the end of CSRD and get to a fully compliant report. What I want to finish on is that Jasper mentioned that ESRS E1 is going to be a material for the vast majority of companies. So what we have done is we've automated as many processes on the way, right, to make it as user-friendly for companies as possible. So we fully automated the measurement of scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions, where scope 3 is obviously the largest and the most complicated one. And this way, yeah, we save sustainability experts a lot of time, so that they can work very efficiently. So that was my part, and then I think we can move on to that's right, the double materiality assessment guide. You can scan the QR code here to get to the guide. It's also on our website, of course.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm just going to go through the questions quickly and see which ones we have time to answer. I can when to start. So I see one question on when to start and how long does a double materiality assessment process usually take? So this is a really good question, and I think it's a question that's keeping a lot of us busy. I've read reports where some of the bigger companies have spent a lot of time on this, several months. But I would also say with this that these are companies that have big sustainability teams, big budgets, and really go all out on their reports. I think actually conducting a double materiality assessment can be a process that doesn't take too long when guided correctly. And then I think the reporting part, that might actually take a while. So making sure that everything is documented correctly, and that everything is compliant for the final stages when the auditor takes a look. So I see here, to my knowledge, the legislation requires you to conduct stakeholder dialogues first, which shortens the long list of ESRS topics to a short list, and you only need to conduct a DMA on shortlist topics only. That is true. So what you do is that you have a look at these stakeholders, you have a look at the context of your company, and you shortlist on what is relevant. This might seem counterintuitive because some issues might not directly be visible, and you're already shortlisting. But it does make sure that you invest your time and resources as best as possible on the relevant ESRS topics. So if there are certain topics that are definitely not relevant to your company, such as, for example, biodiversity, and you work at a software company, then you might conclude quite quickly that this is an ESRS topic that doesn't mandate an in-depth impact and financial materiality assessment. Let's see. Do you also report on low materialities, I see? No. So here again, low is subjective, as the thresholding part itself is a subjective element of the double materiality assessment. So it is up to you to determine what is low. But if you do have a framework wherein something falls under that category, then I would say that it doesn't need to be included in the double materiality assessment. We would include topics in the double materiality assessment is when it is, for example, medium high or very high, depending on what ranges you're using. Yeah, let's see.
I see a question here, a tip on how smaller and medium-sized companies can approach this. And I think here what is really important, like as Jasper mentioned earlier, there's the bigger companies with sustainability teams of 5+, maybe 10+ people that are going to tackle this individually and will really build it from the ground up themselves. I think for smaller and medium-sized companies, as I mentioned earlier when we went through the solution, you really want to use the time of your experts as efficiently as possible, right? So that means that you don't need to invent the wheel by yourself again, but you can really build on knowledge and efficiency from others, right? So working with a software solution here, such as Coolset, could be really beneficial. As again, you use the time of your experts, and usually, so if you don't have a long or a big sustainability team, this part, the CSRD legislation, falls under other roles, and they get pressure on their time because they also have to do their initial job. So really working with a software solution here could be really valuable.
Great. I see one more question, and I think this will be our last one, is how do you measure irremediability? So as I mentioned, the double materiality guide, which you can see, does contain an insight on how to do that. Basically, irremediability means how reversible is a certain impact. So how remediable is it? Measuring this can be done qualitatively or quantitatively. For example, in the example that I used before, where I considered the factory in Germany, if, for example, excessive water use is remediable because you can invest in, for example, efficient water systems. So if you can do something about it instantly, then it is quite remediable. But for example, if your whole business is built on emitting a lot of CO2, then it's less remediable because it does require a significant change of the way your business is operating. So it really depends on qualitative and quantitative indicators of irremediability. But yeah, I can recommend downloading the guide and having a look at how we explain it there. Yeah, I think that was it from us. Should you have any questions, our email address is are listed. Feel free to reach out to us for any questions. Reach out to me if it's really sustainability related, and I'll be happy to get back to you. And reach out to Matthijs if you have questions about our software and how we can help you conduct the double materiality assessment, but also further questions about ESRS and CSRD. We'll be happy to help you. And we hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you.
Bye bye.
And see you next time.